it was maybe a shocking thing to see that from the United States to India, Turkey, Philippines, you name it. I mean, there have been new leaders arrive on the scene, political leaders arrive on the scene who've had a certain attitude towards politics, towards their own societies, a kind of attitude of, let's call it thuggery, an attitude of brutality, maybe masculinity, where they've offered things to their public which reasonable people might find disturbing. For instance, majoritarian sentiments, sentiments against minorities, but also they've promised things, utopias that cannot be realized or cannot be produced without fundamentally changing the social structure in their society. So when Trump, for instance, says that he's going to make America great and produce jobs in America, well, that's only possible if the social structure is changed, if the wealthy are no longer siphoning up the bulk of social wealth, and unless you change the social structure, you've made utopian promises to the public which cannot be met and can only be perhaps met by hatred towards minorities and others. So there's something disturbing about this development, and it was this development that motivated the project that resulted in Strongmen. Now, it's important to understand that you can accumulate as much evidence as you want, sort of social scientific evidence, political scientists or others writing about the arrival of populists or strong men, or as I call them, monsters. You can accumulate a lot of information, but somehow this, information or this righteous anger from intellectuals doesn't quite explain what's happening. What I was interested in was turning to people of a different kind of sensitivity, a different kind of sensibility, novelists, actors, playwrights, and so on. And I wanted them to try to understand, help us understand, very much help us understand, guide us into the world of these monsters. So, which is why Eve Ensler, the American playwright, went under the skin of Donald Trump, or should I say, under the hair of Donald Trump, because she makes a great deal of his orange hair. The Turkish novelist Burhan Sönmez wrote very movingly, I think, about Erdogan's politics, Erdogan's person, the role that Erdogan has played in Turkish politics today. The Indian actor Danish Hussain comes at Narendra Modi with, I think, a laser sharp understanding of the changes in Indian society. Modi is a manifestation of those changes, and I think he does a superb job of bringing out what Modi means, not what Modi is alone, but what he means. And finally, the novelist from the Philippines, Ninochka Rosca, who wrote one of the finest novels about the Marcos years called State of War, comes in here to explain to us what Duterte is doing in the Philippines. So I was interested in having these imaginative people with a great sense of their own societies, their culture, explain the arrival of the monsters to their civilization. So that was the nature, the genesis of the project, and also why these writers were chosen to write for it. See, the issue is with something like fascism of the 1920s and 30s and 40s, was a political movement responding to workers' struggles, left-wing struggles in Italy, in Germany. The Turin auto strike in Italy was something that terrified the Italian bourgeoisie, the Italian ruling class. And the ruling class in Italy, in Germany, in Britain, in many of these societies, including France, thought that bourgeois democracy was not serving them well. And they worried, I think, that the workers' movement, communists, socialists, and others would come to power through the instruments of bourgeois democracy, because mass politics had, in a sense, awakened the power of the communist movement in the West. And so these sections of the ruling elite were willing to make an alliance with fascists who had a mass appeal through hatred, and yet were wedded to the current structure. So fascism of that period was a reaction to the rising of the workers' movement, of the left, of the communist movement, and so on. The monsters, when they came today, are not a reaction to the rise of the left, because after all, the left is in crisis. The left is not in strength. The left is on the back foot. So why have the monsters arrived? Well, the monsters in this period have arrived because liberals and social democrats, the so-called moderate, managers of the capitalist system, who produced the structure of globalization, of international trade to favor big corporations and so on. These political parties have basically exhausted themselves. And these parties exhausted themselves at a time when the left was absent. So the space for the emergence of this virulent monster-like politics was opened up. And that is why these new political formations have emerged, whether it's in Poland or the Philippines. They've emerged in a sense, as the so-called moderates have collapsed, or what Tariq Ali calls the extreme center has collapsed, not in response to a challenge from the left. So the context is different, the politics is different, and I think that needs or bears some scrutiny, some more scrutiny. It's too easy to make a direct line between, say, Adolf Hitler and Donald Trump. I think we need to understand Donald Trump in his moment, and not merely as Hitler reborn or something like that. The fact of the matter is that since the ruling class has no answer to the problems of workers today, of joblessness, of precarious employment, of the cutbacks in the social wage, in other words, in healthcare, education, pension schemes, and so on, the destruction of society in the last 30 years has been quite dramatic. You've seen in India, for instance, perhaps 500,000 farmers commit suicide. This is unprecedented. Great destruction of civilization. So as you see this, and you wonder, what is the ruling class solution to this? Well, they have no solution to it. And it's because they have no solution to it that, the space is opened for the right to emerge. Again, the crisis of the left has meant the left has not the confidence, and also the confidence of very large numbers of people, to offer an alternative to globalization, to this acute situation of precariousness, joblessness, and so on. The left does have ideas, does have answers to some of these problems, but it's not always taken seriously. Meanwhile, the far right, the monsters appear, and they have this sort of, incredible clarity of purpose, where they talk about the solution to joblessness being an end to immigration, for instance. It's a very clear and straightforward message. Or, the way to restart jobs is to deal with, trade policy. In other words, that some other country is cheating. It's always another country that's cheating. In that sense, these are very clear and simple proposals to restart an economy. As I keep suggesting, they make the argument that you sort of grab the economy by the throat and make it cough out jobs, as if it's that easy. There's no sense that the social structure needs to be challenged or changed, or and so this is the reason for the appeal of these parties to sections of the working class, of rural populations, people who have felt left out, somehow brought back, and especially given the fact that their dignity had been compromised during globalization, and now they are given, in a sense, the coin of racism, the coin of xenophobia, hatred of foreigners. This coin allows them perhaps to feel that they have their dignity back again, and that's really the juice of the monster. And it's a very dangerous juice, it's almost poison, but nonetheless, people drink it because they are thirsty for something.